Hello everybody, thank you very much for having me here. I've primarily come to share a project story for an organisation in Scotland called Skills Development Scotland. It's quite an old story, but it's not that often that you get to work with a brand new government body that's been created to define their service strategy and to start to change the services they provide. So it's a fantastic case of not just coming into an existing organisation, but actually being there from the beginning and taking a citizen-centric service thinking approach. Before I tell you this story, just introduce myself. My name's Ben Reason, I'm from Livework, I think someone said that. We're a bit different. We're all from a design background, but most of our work is more in a consulting space. So we use design tools which are much more user-centric, very visual, lots of testing and prototyping, lots of words that don't normally get used in government and don't get used in traditional consulting businesses, although the design world and the design thinking approach is gaining some recognition and credibility these days. So we have lots of people who are very happy to actually make things and try them and learn, even cardboard ticket machines in Oslo. We're 14 years old. We've tried and tested and proved our approach with lots of different organisations. So we work across public, private sector. We because we start with the user or the customer, we feel like we can enter almost any domain. We're not domain experts in any area, not sector experts, but we work alongside the experts in the organisations we work with. And our role is to connect your business or your government ministry or your service to customers. And I think this is a theme probably of this talk, but it's not just government. Everywhere you go, businesses talk a different language to the people that use their services. There's a translation problem that we've heard, I think, already about language being used that people don't understand, but also motivations are different either sides, on the inside and the outside, what people are thinking in their day-to-day. Most service users aren't really thinking about the service that's being offered to them until they need it. So it's not as important as you think it is to them. We use a design process, but to do kind of three core things for organisations we work with. So we do a lot of work which is about setting a strategy, a service strategy, and a user-centric strategy, or innovating services. We do a lot of, we think we've heard already about design and test to improve something, improve the performance of a service for the customers, but also for the organisation. And we do a lot of work to help people take things to market, so to actually realise and guide service development. And we focus on three things. We start with the customer and their story, their experience, but we make sure that we connect that to the business impact, the performance side of things. And we've learned that in services you really have to work alongside the capabilities of that organisation, both their capability to actually change and redesign, but also the capabilities that they have technically or people capabilities. So that's how we work. So I love the title of this event, Government as a Service. It's kind of close to my heart. We started the business thinking no one's applying design to services, yet they make up the majority of our economies. Most services are much less satisfying than the kind of industrial products that we use day to day. We sometimes say, what do you prefer, your BMW or your bank account? Just to draw that into stark kind of contrast. And today I sort of want to break that down into three areas that we've worked with SDS. So first, just the act of thinking service, which I think again is a theme. So what happens if you think about what you do as a service rather than a piece of administration? What happens if you think about individual service users rather than populations or demographics and things like that? And you set your strategy through that kind of thinking. Then how do you translate that into actually doing something differently, taking something forward, launching a new way of delivering a service? And finally, how do you embed this approach into an organisation so it's not just a project? So SDS was created, Skills Development Scotland, created by the new Scottish Government when devolution happened for Scotland, to bring together three existing agencies. One that was the Careers Advice Service, which would be in schools or in high street centres where you could walk in and get advice from an expert, another which was a direct telephone service, and a third which was more of a strategic body about where does Scotland need skills and how are we going to build those skills. So they were trying to bring the sort of the needs of the country, the strategy of how do we build the skills that we need for business and for growth and all those kind of things, together with the needs of individuals who actually want to work out what they're going to do in their lives or how they're going to adjust to a setback like a redundancy. So it was a very exciting opportunity with those three things coming together. How can we kind of consolidate and form? And of course, one of the reasons for the government doing that was to rationalise and to save money. So they were aware, this is pre-2008, so it was pre-austerity, but there was still a lot of pressure on cost, and delivering career service is an expensive business because you have expensive advisors who need to spend time with large numbers of people. So there was a real pressure and on the service even then. And the other side of it was an analysis that although that investment is significant, it's not enough, it's not meeting the needs of individuals. So one of our core groups of people we needed to serve were kind of young people with lower education achievements and lower life chances who really needed guidance and were getting very limited amounts of time with people. So we're not getting the kind of support that they required. So we had a real user drive, but there was also a financial pressure. And the whole project started actually in a sort of off-site with the directors of Skills Development Scotland and the governance board. And the next slides are I find quite funny because they are the sketches that we did in the workshop that set the service strategy and the business model. So they look quite scruffy, and I drew them, but they're the real thing. So the first thing, then I guess the core thing about this, and the core thing this was an exciting opportunity, is one of those directors had managed to get into the conversation that we were going to do things differently, that we were going to focus on the individual service user as our organising kind of principle. The one thing that everybody has in common in this organisation are those end users, those customers, and if we can organise around them rather than around the sort of the policies that government have set, then we have a different kind of organisation that might better meet those people's needs and deliver some of the efficiencies that were required. So this is just to show how the kind of the core service strategy was around individual access to advice and guidance, and that there was an opportunity to provide that in a more effective way by consolidating online, by consolidating some of these contact centres, face-to-face centres, but also by getting better data, better insight and better understanding of who those individuals were, making services personal. So that was kind of the core, and then we had to think about how does that work with partners, how does that work with the sort of strategic projects. So for example, we need more engineers for the oil industry or something like that. And how does it work at a local level? Scotland has some very remote parts which need very specific things done. So how can we provide a kind of a platform that allows SDS to do those other parts of business that they need to do? And the other big question was, how do we provide a universal service that's accessible to everyone in Scotland? That's a requirement. So you've got a kind of context where you need to save money, but you have an obligation to provide a universal service. On top of which these more specific, customized projects might happen, or strategic things. So the kind of core concept around universal is if we can do more things through universal channels like the web and the call centre, but if we can also make things more personal through better knowledge management, and also by thinking more about individuals, and the core concept of that was that funding follows an individual. So if I'm a young person and there's a certain amount of funding allocated to me, I actually have some control over that in terms of what training I might be able to access. So what young people being a big theme of this, just wanted to pull out certain things from the model that will come back in the next bit. So personalization through an individual portfolio or a number. So I'm now an individual person with my career, my learning, but this can be delivered through a rich, you can see how old this is because it says Web 2.0. when that was still cool. But also that there was still highly specialized and targeted face-to-face. And one of the points I want to make, because I know this sort of event has a digital drive to it, but we as Livework always want to understand how the human and the digital parts of a service interact, and we'll come back to that. And finally, this is sort of the bit where I got really excited. So we're talking about individuals, but we need to have better understanding of what that means from a career point of view. So a lot of work was done with academics to define a set of service principles around careers, but not just careers in terms of I need to find a job, but it's what do I need in order to be more resilient as an individual and more able to develop through my lifetime. So I've mentioned young people, but the other core group of people are older people who things change, the economy changed, the jobs that they were trained to do maybe disappear, and how do they readjust to that. So these things, your understanding of yourself and your strengths, the horizon, the kind of what you see as the possibilities open to you and accessible to you, and the networks that get you into those places. How do you develop those things? It's like a meta level in terms of finding a career. So enough of the sort of theoretical stuff. How does that actually happen? How do you design for a service? Well, in this case, we had some ideas. We had some, from that strategic work, we had some ideas around a kind of universal online resource and service that would allow people to do personal career management themselves. So you can see with these are concept sketches very early in the process, but the word "my" comes into it, as it often does online. So something that's not a list of these are the careers you could do. It's not an information resource. It's actually a place that you go to manage and understand and develop the things that are defined in those principles. How do I understand myself better? How do I set some goals? How do I actually manage my career? So it's a service online that's set to do that. So interestingly, because we had this concept, that's where we started. I guess we made a whole lot of assumptions about needs, as we were hearing earlier, and we really needed to then validate and test them. So here are the young people of Scotland. So we had a road trip of talking to young people with those early sketches, early prototypes, trying to talk to them about could they imagine using these, how would they fit, and we talked to them and we talked to some of the advisors who were working with them. Here's two more. Getting these guys to talk is fun. You sort of say, what do you think of that? It's all right. So we learned a lot about learning with young people and how to get them out of their shells. Three more. And then we also went to talk to these guys who aren't so young. So we talked to a lot of mainly men who'd worked in industries that were in decline, lost their jobs, needed to rethink what they did. There's another one. I think this guy used to drive a truck. And this guy, who interestingly, so we're just sort of pushing it out, I think had been made redundant from an IT firm, so he was the outlier. So I'll come to what we learnt from those guys in a minute. But what we were able to develop from all of that was initially an understanding of the journey that these people need to go on to use a new online career management service. And what we learned is that they kind of need to go through it in two phases. They need to explore in a sort of slightly impersonal way. They need to sort of get something from it, and then they might commit into actually personalizing, saving some things, using it over a longer period of time. So we have this kind of explore theme coming back again in a personal sense. And what we've done here is define a number of components of the service. If you look at that top bit, that would be part of the online service. And we've mapped those in relation to the parts of the service which are delivered face-to-face, because what we really wanted to do was integrate those two. And then we kind of looked less at the telephone aspect of that, but that was mirroring the face-to-face. But the really exciting thing was what we learnt by talking to those people is that the recently unemployed guys said, all I need to know is that this exists. I'll make a phone call because that's kind of the first thing I'm told to do when I'm made redundant. Here's a support service, make that phone call. But tell me this website exists, I'll go, I'll self-serve. I'm in a hurry to get another job, and I'm an adult and responsible. But with the young people, that really wasn't ever going to happen. So we had to think of a way to kind of get them into this. So we realized that this online tool wasn't pure self-service, it was something that would enable the careers advisors to deliver their part of it, but to not then kind of say goodbye and good luck, that we can introduce you to something that will stay with you. So this is just showing how there are things that you do face-to-face with your careers advisor, and often they are somebody in school or college, but then they make sure that you're set up and you understand and you're on that website, and that lives with you for longer. And they can monitor your usage, and they can prompt you if you're not using it. So that we have a service, and I guess I didn't mention, but most of those careers advice sessions are 15 minutes, so the amount of quality you can get into that. It also was designed to take away a lot of the boring time-wasting things that happen in that face-to-face meeting about just capturing data and things, and allow that advisor to really focus on the kind of the things that a human being can do that a website can't. So the real personal, kind of get under the skin of the person and what they really need, what motivates them. So from all that, around 2008, they launched a website that's called My World of Work. It's been held up in Scotland as a kind of exemplar of government doing web, not just from the kind of the concept, but also the way that they delivered it, which was in-house and very quickly, which was really effective. And interestingly, from our point of view, from the insight we had, it's now the tool of choice in 80% of colleges across Scotland. So these guys who are careers advisors see the value in it, and they're doing that part of picking it up and introducing it. So I thought that there were two kind of really key things for me in that. One was looking at service and how you integrate different channels, how you integrate professionals with new digital opportunities. And the second thing, what the things that you really need to go out and talk to end users about to learn in order for something to be successful. So finally, SDS had the ambition that they were going to continue to do things differently. They had some nice principles around being customer-centric and user-centric, but also about doing what they called extreme collaboration. So I think I saw some silos earlier. They exist in Scotland as well as Poland. They really wanted to break down some of those departmental groupings and to think how they would work differently. So we took the bold thing of saying, well, design does those two things. We collaborate and we help people focus on users. So I showed these 4 steps earlier. We developed with a number of different public bodies, because we saw a kind of repeat requirement for not just to have a project, but to bring these skills into the organisation. So we sort of feel that you don't need to be a designer to do design. You just need to kind of have the permission and the approach. So just to step through, we worked with what became the Service Innovation Directorate within SDS to help people who'd previously been careers advisors or managers or people in IT, just how do you go out and capture end user needs? What do you do? I've never done that before. I need to kind of practice that. So this is one of their guys talking to one of those probably recently unemployed older gentlemen, understand what his world and what's going on there. And it's partly about the permission to do it. It's partly about having a few tools and props that help you capture information. The second thing is to get these groups to work in that collaborative way. And again, it's about using some design tools, and in this workshop it's about permission to draw, permission to kind of imagine what those future interactions might be, those future interfaces, features and functions, and to work alongside people from other parts of the organisation, or work alongside customers, or work alongside frontline staff, so you get a rich multi-dimensional view. So we develop that as a number of approaches and workshop types that they can use. And then the really tricky thing, getting people to actually design and test stuff, getting them to take the time to stop and to make a paper version or a digital version without all the infrastructure behind it, something quick, dirty, testable. This is one of our favorite Livework tools, which is a foam board iPhone that you can just slot pages into. And one of the fantastic things about things like this is people don't take them too seriously. They're happy to criticize them because they don't look like you've, polished them so much that I don't know if this is a problem in Poland, but you know how polite we are in England. So that we really need to do things like this in order to get good feedback. And there's a really serious point here. There was a study done by the National Health Service who had an innovation kind of hub that showed most services as they're developed in the health service, they go from, I think you were saying this just a minute ago, they go from the problem to the solution in a very quick. So the first solution that comes up is often the one that's implemented. And the implementation is basically somewhere around 50% of the potential that was there. And then it requires constant kind of rework to unpick the things that don't work and build them up. So let's say you take 6 months to go from problem to implementation, and then you've got another 6 years of sort of fiddling with this thing and fixing it and things. Whereas if you, let's say, took twice as long in the design phase to launch and you actually designed, prototype, tested, improved, before you spent a whole load of money on implementation and rollout, you'll get to something that's more like 80% of quality, cheaper. So if you do one thing, test before you build. And then finally, we at Livework, we're very keen on thinking about how tools that enable you to specify and communicate a service that's designed around the customer. So if you think about a discipline like architecture, where you want to build a building, you need to communicate to your client what it's going to be, you need to communicate to engineers what they need to kind of build underneath the surface to make sure it stays up and lasts, and you need to communicate to those guys who are going to build it, and a whole load of different guys, from the builder to the electrician to the air conditioning engineer. So you have this complex system that the architect is trying to manage. And we think we need similar tools, and they don't really exist in services. But the nearest, or the thing that we have that we're constantly developing, is the idea, sort of taking the metaphor from architecture of a service blueprint, something that defines what needs to be built. This is just looking at kind of the front end of that blueprint. What are the channels that customers might interact with? But we can go below the surface and say, okay, if those are the channels, those are the interactions we want, what are the different business capabilities that are required? What are the different functions? What do those functions need to do? And we can have a view of a service which isn't siloed, it's actually driven by the customer. So we developed simple blueprint structures that SDS could continue to use. And of course, they made it their own, so we had our approach. This is something that I got when I went back to them after we'd worked with them. So they'd integrated, they started using these 4 words: discover, define, develop, and deliver as their process. And they'd integrated it with the things that are really important for them to do in order to talk to policymakers, talk to politicians, or to talk to expertise. And I think this is really crucial. So we're an outside company that has a particular approach, but they really need to make it their own. They need to integrate it with their business. And that, for me, was proof that we'd delivered what we'd required to, because it wasn't ours anymore, it was theirs. So that's me. I hope that was a good story, and I'd love to hear any questions. Thank you.